My name's Tom. For the last 4 years, I've been running the part of MI5 which looks at the threat from the Russian state.
My name is Kate. I've been in the service for about the last 14 years, doing a variety of roles, largely in investigations. I'm currently working on the Russia mission.
Tom and Kate met me at MI5's little-known underground museum at their Thames House headquarters in London to talk about countering the threat from Russia in the grey zone. It's the first time anyone involved in such top-secret counterintelligence work for the security service has agreed to an interview. They were using actors to voice their words to protect their identities. Tom came to the meeting with a small black box in one hand. He placed it on a table as we said hello, and then suggested I open it. Inside was a smaller, pale pink oblong box with the words Premier Jour, Nina Ricci, Eau de Parfum printed on it in dark purple letters.
It's about the size of a small pack of cards, about half as thick, maybe about the length of my finger.
I flipped it open to reveal a tiny perfume bottle, half filled with a yellowy coloured liquid. All innocent looking enough. But this is a mock-up of the actual perfume bottle and box used by two suspected Russian hitmen when they tried to kill former spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia with the nerve agent Novichok in March 2018 in the English city of Salisbury.
It is a really powerful demonstration of just how easy it was to slip this into the UK and how reckless the attack in Salisbury was, given it presumably came in somebody's pocket or some luggage on the flight.
I asked Tom if MI5 could stop another Salisbury-style attack. He says the agency is doing everything it can, but there are no absolute guarantees in the grey zone. My name is Deborah Haynes. I'm the Foreign Affairs Editor at Sky News, and you're listening to my podcast, Into the Grey Zone, which explores a murky evolution of warfare. I'll explain the covert tactics used by states, criminals and terrorist groups to deceive, gain influence, and at times, kill. In this final episode, we hear from two MI5 officers about operating in the grey zone and how their work is having to change to keep up with the threat. This includes doing more with what they know, like agreeing to this interview, something that was sanctioned by Ken McCallum, the Director General of the Security Service.
The Russia threat to the UK has been a feature of the national security landscape for the UK for almost the entire history of MI5, certainly for decades. The nature of the threat, I think, is possibly changing, given the increased use of, for example, cyber, social media, the 24-hour news cycle. The pace at which things move in the media and internationally, I think, has speeded up.
It means the nature of the job of a counterintelligence officer like Tom is also having to change. Counterintelligence, or counter-espionage, is what spy agencies call the act of disrupting attempts by foreign states to steal secrets, insert agents, even carry out assassinations. It pitches spy against spy in what had traditionally been a relatively slow-moving game of deception, patience and counterattack. But new operations in the grey zone are changing the old rules. When Tom talks about CT, he's referring to counter-terrorism, another key area of work for MI5.
There's a sort of sense, maybe, that historically the work, the counterintelligence work, was a sort of game of chess, move and counter-move, but maybe at a slightly lower pace than maybe some of the other aspects of certainly national security work around CT. I would say that is kind of a historic narrative now. I would say what we are now seeing is the evolution of a threat, which is as near as it's ever going to be kind of a real-time threat, which requires real-time responses, both from the agencies, the intelligence community, and from policymakers. So I think you'll just see an acceleration of the constant competition, as you describe it.
The phrase constant competition is one military chiefs use to try and capture this idea of countries attacking each other in the grey zone, just below the threshold of war. As we've heard throughout this series, it means anything can be used as a weapon, from cyber attacks and disinformation to business deals and politics. It makes for a broad, unpredictable, and evolving range of threats for MI5 to deal with. So I'm really curious about how you deal with that as an intelligence agency, because you've got the professional intelligence officers, which is like your bread and butter, dealing with that. But then you also have this murky grey zone world where journalists can potentially be exploited, where information can be used, where elections can be meddled with, where businesses can be corrupted or coerced into acting a certain way. How can you possibly deal with all of that?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, really, the complexity of that. So on the one hand, we have a sense of what you might describe as the traditional threat, which is the intelligence services, which operate in ways which are broadly understood in a very kind of disciplined, if ruthless way. And then you have the evolution of this threat into another area, the grey zone, as you describe it, where this is going to be very, very difficult for us. The question we find ourselves asking around the kind of work you're describing is, to what degree is this state-driven? To what degree is it for political or state outcomes? To what degree are the people involved in it aware that they are involved in it? There's a question for us, given our kind of resource constraints, about to what degree does it matter? And we're very keen to avoid getting into a kind of debate about, policing the internet or going anywhere near, which looks like interfering with free speech. So you also then get into a question about how do you avoid, as an intelligence community, talking about whether, message X or message Y was successful in what it was setting out to do. So what we are spending our time thinking more about is, what was the intention behind it?
It means MI5 and the UK's other intelligence agencies are having to adapt how they work to fight an increasingly diverse challenge that stretches from dark alleyways to cyberspace. Kate investigates Russia's military intelligence agency, the GRU, including a unit suspected of carrying out the Salisbury spy poisonings that we covered in episode 1. I asked her how she views the grey zone.
It's a tough one. It isn't a term I use on a daily basis, but certainly this podcast has made me think about the fact that actually a lot of what we do is looking in that space. I think that makes responding harder. There isn't a set of responses for how you deal with stuff going on in the grey zone, particularly when you start to think about things like political influence, some of the activity going on in cyberspace. We don't yet have all the kind of laws that would give you a sort of black and white answer for responding to that type of activity. That can make it challenging when you're looking at it, because when you're investigating anything, you want to think that there's an end state where something is no longer a threat. You've managed that threat in some way, whether that's arresting someone that can no longer pose a threat or having sanctions or whatever. There is a range of things that we can do. But some of this stuff, when we're dealing with hostile states and dealing with activity in the grey zone, there aren't always an easy set of response options. And that just makes it all the more challenging when you're investigating it.
Tom said work by the UK's intelligence community to adapt to the grey zone threat was underway before the poisoning of former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in Salisbury. But the shock of the first chemical weapons attack on European soil since the Second World War accelerated this change.
My name's Tom. I have been in MI5 for really quite a long time, probably longer than I care to remember. I've worked in a whole series of different parts of the organisation, both on investigations and operations, largely on counter-terrorism, including Northern Ireland and Islamist counter-terrorism. I've done a range of corporate functions, and for the last 4 years, I've been running the part of MI5 which looks at the threat from the Russian state.
Tom described the moment he learnt of the attack on Sergei and Yulia Skripal.
It came as a complete shock to everybody in my team. I remember we were on a management away day, believe it or not, when we received a message that 2 people had been found on a park bench in Salisbury, Russian nationals, and that they appeared to be exhibiting symptoms of poisoning. By the time we were back in Thames House, it became apparent who these individuals were, and at that point, MI5 and partners swung into action. We have an intelligence operations centre here, so that was opened, and huge resources were starting to flow in very quickly to try to understand what had happened and what the threat might be.
Investigators discovered the father and daughter had been poisoned with a liquid nerve agent called Novichok, disguised in a perfume bottle and sprayed on their front door by 2 suspected GRU hitmen on the 4th of March 2018.
The next 6 months was a kind of like living through a bit of being in the eye of a hurricane. A very large media story internationally unfolding around us, with political, international relations, intelligence, police angles to it. And through that, our core focus was understanding what had happened and bringing those to account.
Once the perfume dispenser used in the attack was recovered, scientists at the UK's Defence Laboratory at Porton Down mocked up a replica, which could be shown to ministers, foreign allies, and, as luck would have it, me.
It's about the size of a small pack of cards, about half as thick, maybe about the length of my finger. It's a sort of pink metallic box, and when you open the box, there is a much smaller bottle, about 3 inches long, with a small amount of yellowy liquid in it and a long nozzle applicator in it, which was presumably there to protect the assailants when they were deploying the Novichok. It is a really powerful demonstration of just how easy it was to slip this into the UK, and how reckless the attack in Salisbury was, given it presumably came in somebody's pocket or some luggage on the flight.
Tom said MI5 can't possibly guarantee to be able to stop every future grey zone-style assassination attempt, but it can and is adapting the way it works to stand a better chance.
I think we have entered the same realm that we are in with our counter-terrorism colleagues, which is that we do absolutely everything we can to stop any events from taking place in the UK which are damaging the UK population or property, but there are no absolute guarantees. We are doing absolutely everything we can every day right across government to make this the hardest possible operating environment for our adversaries. We are making it as difficult as we can for them to get in, and we are then investigating and taking action where we see hostile state activity, wherever it is in the UK.
My name is Kate. I work in MI5, the security service. I've been in the service for about the last 14 years, doing a variety of roles, largely in investigations. I'm currently working on the Russia mission, so countering the threat from Russia.
Kate, who I interviewed separately, told me about her work investigating the team accused of the Salisbury spy poisonings, a GRU unit known as 29155. It's also been linked to other grey zone-style attacks, including a failed coup plot against the government of Montenegro, the poisoning of a Bulgarian arms dealer, and the alleged payment of bounties to the Taliban for killing NATO troops in Afghanistan. Russia has previously denied such allegations.
The first thing I'd say is that all of those operations that you've highlighted there represent the breadth of the unit's kind of malign activities, both the spread of those activities globally, but also the scope. So sabotage, subversion, through to assassination. And I would say kind of both as horrific acts in their own right, but also combined, they demonstrate the extreme nature of the activity conducted by this unit. And they are all activities outside of what we would consider appropriate for a government agency to be involved in.
I mean, you've been looking into this unit as part of your work. Can you sort of talk a bit more about what you've learned? Like, what's the most surprising or interesting thing about the kind of activities that they do and are willing to do?
In all honesty, the thing I find most interesting is not so much the activity they're doing, but the international response that it's prompted, lots of which has already been captured in the world's press, and in some arenas has kind of generated significant interest, which has led to ongoing exposure of the unit's activities and is very much keeping it in the media.
She didn't offer any specifics, but one example is the work of the investigative website Bellingcat, which we talked about in the first episode. Its investigators have used information from internet searches, trawling databases, and analysing images to reveal details about the alleged Skripal attackers and others. The presentation of evidence-based facts is one of the best ways to uncover the truth behind a grey zone attack, which will typically be layered in ambiguity and denied by the perpetrator.
There's clearly a shared sense of shock amongst international partners that another state would want to interfere, in the most kind of horrific way, be that a willingness to conduct murder on the streets of Europe or to subvert and sabotage a democratic process. And I think it's the diversity of the unit's victims. So from people that they might consider traitors to Russia through to kind of arms dealers that have got on the wrong side of Russia, through to democratically elected governments who kind of aren't in line with what they'd like. It's that diversity of victims that I think has created this shared sense of concern and a determination to prevent further such activity taking place. So for me, as someone kind of responding to this, I think that's been most interesting for me.
So you kind of said at the beginning about how, the activities that this unit is accused of doing is just way outside how these kind of people would operate. What does that make you think when you realise that?
I guess for me, when you work on counter-terrorism, certainly within the service you might expect at some point to deal with a horrific kind of potential for lethal acts on UK soil. That is a reality of counter-terrorism work. It was absolutely not what I expected when I started working on counterintelligence. A lot of our work against hostile states focuses on espionage, as you'd expect, spies investigating spies, to put it crudely, but then acts like Salisbury happen in the grey zone, so to speak, and it makes you stop and realise how worlds apart we are from the intelligence agencies of hostile states, both in our professional purpose and goals, but also the tools that we're given to achieve those goals. So I think for me, looking at what a unit like 29155 does, I think it's worth remembering that they are not a rogue unit. They are part of the GRU, which in turn is part of the Russian intelligence services, which is in turn part of the Russian state. This isn't a rogue unit. They are acting as part of the Russian state. I think it's when you combine those things that, for us, that's kind of been quite shocking to see, and certainly for me as an individual.
And they always use equivalents, don't they? So they sort of use equivalents and like counter-deny, counter-accuse. And it can create suspicion that maybe MI6 carried out the poisonings. Could you kind of tackle that one? Do the intelligence agencies in the UK conduct the same kind of malign activities that we're seeing the GRU conduct?
No, absolutely not.
The Salisbury attack triggered multiple challenges for MI5, the rest of the UK intelligence community, and the police. First, they had to investigate the poisonings and build a case against the culprits. Then they had to help ministers devise a retaliation in coordination with allies, which led to the expulsion of 153 Russian intelligence officers from across the world, including 23 from the UK. Finally, the security service, as well as MI6 and GCHQ, said they had to rethink their assumptions about the Russia threat. Tom again.
We probably hadn't calculated just how determined and ruthless our adversary might be to conduct this kind of attack.
Well, what does that tell you then about the threat?
Well, I mean, it says a lot about our adversaries, which is that they are ruthless, determined, well-resourced. They have, as far as we can determine, a very different political risk appetite. And in some senses, there continues to be a vigorous debate across government about this. This was intended potentially as a message to the UK government. So this was less about carrying out an attack than it was about sending a message both to the individual people in the GRU with whom he would have worked and to the UK government in general. It's a very blunt way of delivering that message, though.
Tom listed 4 areas where rules or ways of working have changed since the Salisbury poisonings to better counter the Russian threat.
I think the first is that the UK government has given us, as a community, more powers, and there are more powers to come.
This includes legislation that came into force in 2020, giving officials the power to stop someone at the UK's borders if there's a suspicion they might be involved in any kind of hostile activity on behalf of another state.
I think the second thing is our ability to join up with particularly police partners has improved, and our understanding of the wide range of people in the UK who might be under threat, not just from the Russian state actually, but from a range of other hostile state actors has improved. We know more about who those people are. We've evolved a much more detailed process to help us manage the threat to those people and provide advice, guidance and other mitigations to the threat they might face.
Can you say a bit more about what's done to help protect individuals?
We get into difficult territory there because clearly those individuals are each unique and the threats that they face are unique. And as a result, the way in which we would approach those is unique and tailored to each individual. But suffice to say, it could be anything from security advice to physical arrangements around their property and movements to police support. And it's done in lockstep with the police in each region of the country to make sure that there are no gaps between our understanding of the threat and the police response.
And is that something that did change because of Salisbury?
Yes, it's been more on a more structured footing, I would describe it.
What does that mean?
There is now a kind of formal process. I don't want to get into kind of boring governance, but there is now a structured process which the police and MI5 go through, which will help us understand both what the nature of the threat is and what the mitigation should be. It was not done on as structured a way before.
He said the third change prompted by the Salisbury spy poisonings is how the UK is working even more closely with allies when responding to a threat by a hostile state.
We were astonished and gratified from very, very early on in the Salisbury investigation to receive literally dozens of offers of assistance, information, support from our international partners. The 153 expulsions is a really clear demonstration of the international resolve to push back against this act. And I would say that that spirit of international collaboration has continued and intensified both bilaterally, nation to nation, and also through the security and other fora that we sit in. So this is much more of an international effort than it probably felt before Salisbury.
Finally, Tom says there's a lot more collaboration between the UK's spy agencies as well as the police when dealing with Russia. It mirrors the collaboration that had already been happening to combat terrorism. When Tom talks about MI6, he uses their other acronym, SIS, the Secret Intelligence Service.
We have always been on a journey towards further alignment, further joint working, further joint teams. The counter-terrorism work we do is very joined up. But I think what it's done is it's further accelerated the join-up of the Russia mission, as we would describe it, to the point where we now have a single Russia mission, jointly governed, jointly led, jointly prioritised with joint teams, in many cases co-located to ensure that the intelligence inputs and our ability to align what we're doing against the greatest threats is as efficient as it can be. We can't afford to have gaps in our communications with each other.
Kate, described how this merging of resources felt from her perspective.
I mean, I would say as someone working on it, I feel as much a kind of officer of the UK intelligence community as I do as an officer of MI5. I speak to my counterparts in SIS and GCHQ every single day. I talk to them as often as I talk to people internally. You know, it very much feels we are one mission working to a single set of objectives against this target set. And as you'd expect, when you pool your resources, when you pool your knowledge, you just have a much broader view. And we're also bringing together lots of different talented individuals with different areas of expertise. And it enables us to be as ambitious as we can be and as creative as we can be in how we tackle this threat. In that sense, it's kind of been an exciting time to work in this area to really see that join up.
Tom again.
I think alongside that, I would say that what has changed, and I think this is probably already in train before Salisbury, is an expectation by government that we do more with what we know. So we have historically had an amazing ability to collect, analyse, understand intelligence about Russian activity in the UK. But the expectation on us from government now is that it's less about what we know and more about what we can do with what we know, which matters. So my teams and the teams right across the UK community are thinking all the time about the outcomes and the impacts rather than the knowledge that they can develop.
A desire to do more with what they know could even be why Tom and Kate have agreed to this interview. Speaking more about her work, Kate says she thinks Unit 29155's mission
is centred on eliminating Russia's enemies abroad and destabilising the West, effectively a deniable group of individuals, or at least I assume their intention was to be deniable, but to conduct what is pretty dirty work on behalf of the Russian state.
And do you have any reason to believe that the unit 29155 is still active, maybe even here in the UK?
So I think what I'd say is any unit whose remit is as broad as we've discussed, sabotage, subversion, assassinations, I think they are a unit we will have to continue to worry about. The pattern of activity we've seen over the years would suggest that. But again, they haven't been wildly successful. There's an awful lot that's been published in the media about the unit and about the unit's activities. Whether those things will have an impact on their ability to operate, it's still to be seen.
And sort of going into more detail about how they actually operate, can you say like what you've learned about their modus operandi?
So I guess at a basic level, this is a special operations unit. It's a military unit, special forces type unit. They will be well-trained military officers. A lot has been said in the media about the unit and its members, including naming individuals and their backgrounds, passport details, travel information, home addresses in some cases. There's arguably an unprecedented level of information about the unit out in the open, given it probably likes to think that it acts clandestinely. What I can say is that investigating the unit remains the priority for the UK. I imagine it remains a priority for other international partners, given the global nature of this unit's activities. And you'll understand that we don't want to give too much away about where we're at with our understanding. But certainly an unprecedented amount of information is out there.
And can you please put it into context for people that don't live in the sort of spy world? Like, how would you feel if suddenly, in the same way as these guys have had their photographs and passports and their histories plastered around the world's media, like, how would you feel if that happened to you or one of your colleagues here? What is the effect of that?
I mean, I'd be feeling very uncomfortable. Even talking in this way is kind of uncomfortable for someone in this world. So I imagine that they would be feeling very uncomfortable. When you join an organization like this in the intelligence services, you expect the organization to offer you a level of protection to enable you to do your job professionally and to the best of your ability. be pretty concerned if I was undertaking activity which led me to be exposed in that way. Again, I think it comes back to the type of activity that they're undertaking. When innocent people are getting killed in the streets of Europe, that's not something people turn a blind eye to and will cause this kind of scrutiny, which, for someone working clandestinely is going to feel uncomfortable when your details are out there.
Three years on from Salisbury, what does the threat from Russia look like?
So there's a range of threats from the Russian state. The first, obviously, it was the threat from the intelligence officers at the embassy. So we have pursued what the then Prime Minister said in Parliament after Salisbury, where she said that we would not allow the Russian intelligence services to rebuild their capabilities in the UK.
Tom is talking about preventing Moscow from repairing the damage done to its intelligence network in the UK following the expulsion of 23 Russian spies, including all of its known GRU officers.
We know that the Russians are keen to rebuild their embassy intelligence officer cadre. We are very keen to ensure that doesn't happen. So a lot of our work goes into that. But it has also expanded beyond that into the other nature of the threat. And we've been able to devote more resources to looking at people who might not be associated with the embassy, people who might be here either permanently or visitors under business cover, or as journalists or academics or tourists or others who might want to come into the UK. And I think that's part of the reason why our join up with other agencies like the Home Office and the police and borders is really important, because those people aren't diplomats. So we can use different investigative tools to deliver different outcomes against those threats. I should also add, I guess, that we're obviously looking more at cyber alongside NCSC, who are in the lead with this.
The NCSC stands for the National Cyber Security Centre, which we covered in episode 4.
And one of the areas that MI5 is looking in particular, well, all of the agencies are looking, at the way in which cyber intersects with the real world. I think it's getting harder and harder to see cyber as one thing and the real world as another. So we look in particular at that. And increasingly, we are also looking at what you might describe as the non-intelligence actors, those actors who are potentially trying to influence or interfere in our democratic way of life at the behest of the Russian state, but potentially with the knowledge of the intelligence services as well. So that's clearly an increasing focus of activity for us as well.
I asked him whether the Kremlin had been able to reinsert any of its spies.
So we are working very hard to ensure that they don't.
Have you tried? Have you been able to stop them?
I would say that it would be a logical assumption that having lost 23 intelligence officers, the Russian government would want to try and replace them in some way. We work really hard on preventing them from doing that. Have we been entirely successful? Time will tell.
But, as Tom has suggested, and as we've heard throughout this series, hostile states don't need intelligence officers or even agents on the ground of a target country to launch an attack or meddle in its politics. Clearly, spotting a foreign spy who's, say, infiltrated a political party is a job for MI5. But what about dealing with an information campaign on social media aimed at amplifying divisions at election time? Or, dare I say it, during the referendum on Brexit, especially when it's not clear if the accounts posting the content are backed by a hostile state or are simply genuine British voters or politicians making inflammatory claims. How to defend democracy was a key theme in a parliamentary report on Russia's alleged activities in the UK that was published in July 2020. A headline finding by the Intelligence and Security Committee, which oversees the UK's spy agencies, was that the government of then Prime Minister Theresa May failed to conduct any proper assessment into whether Russia had interfered in the Brexit vote.
We were concerned to note that seeing the growing body of evidence that Russia did this kind of interference in quite a sophisticated fashion, that nothing had been done, and indeed the agencies themselves had been not in any way encouraged. Indeed, there was a bit of me which felt that they had been discouraged from reopening this issue and retrospectively looking to see if there was clear evidence of Russian interference. This was why we commented at our surprise that we had been given so little information on the subject.
Dominic Grieve, a former Conservative MP, was chair of the committee when it compiled the report. I asked what made him think British spies had been discouraged from investigating potential Russian interference.
Clearly, the intelligence agencies of the United Kingdom see their primary function as being protecting us against espionage, and terrorism. And of course, the moment they have to carry out examination of what's going on within an internal democratic process, that's a very delicate issue. And as our agencies have high ethical standards, it's an area that they're probably not very keen on getting involved in, because it might give the impression that they're being dragged into making political judgments. But on the other hand, it's worth bearing in mind that one of the remits specifically set for MI5, for example, is the protection of our democratic processes. And I have to say that for the future, it seems to me, as this problem is developing globally, that one of the areas on which there's going to have to be focus is the extent to which our democratic processes may be influenced or subverted by external actors.
It's also true, though, that the traditional arms of government tasked with protecting national security, like spy agencies and the military, can't deal with the full spectrum of grey zone threats on their own. In 2017, Mark Sedwill, now Lord Sedwill, when he was the UK's National Security Advisor, devised something called the fusion doctrine.
The idea was essentially to bring together all of our national capabilities, not just national security capabilities, in pursuit of all of our national objectives. And for a country of our size to do that in a coherent way could be one of our key advantages.
This doctrine recognises that different parts of government, such as health and education, as well as the private sector, are also needed to keep the UK safe. While Lord Sedwill appeared confident his fusion mantra is being fully embraced, I'm not convinced it's really achieving much beyond a few more departments becoming involved in national security meetings and lots of talk about an all-of-government approach. Despite what the idea of the fusion doctrine and the need to be fused in your response to these attacks, there seems to be a disparity between the kind of acceptance, understanding or willingness to adapt amongst the different departments. So Defence gets it, Foreign Office gets it, Home Office gets it to an extent, but does Education get it? Does DCMS get it? What do you think? DCMS stands for the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport.
Well, I think they are getting it. And so if you look at the legislation that is now moving through in order to enable more government intervention on national security grounds against particular, to deal with particular kinds of takeovers in particular sectors and so on, that's come out of the business department. And the business department is highly attuned now to the nature of that kind of risk in a way they wouldn't have been probably 5 years ago.
Lord Sedwill is referring to the National Security and Investment Bill, which is designed to give the government new powers to ban foreign takeovers in sectors like defence or energy if they pose a threat to national security.
DCMS are highly attuned to it. The digital is now a big part of, probably a bigger part of their brand than it was before, and they were responsible for the overall approach and indeed the legislation that is enabling us to regulate telecommunications more effectively and ensure that we have the right mechanism in place to deal with high-risk vendors in that area.
It's good to hear there's evidence of change. I just don't think it's anywhere near profound or rapid enough, especially given the pervasive and evolving nature of the threat. Back with MI5, I asked Tom whether he thinks the threat to the UK from Russia is increasing.
I would say it is not. I would say it's evolving and diversifying rather than getting worse. I would also say our understanding of it is probably getting better. So that means that there is a risk that it looks like it's getting worse. But I think it would be a mistake to sort of characterize this as a new Cold War. We are pushing back as a government and a population, a community, against excess from a foreign state. This is not a desire by the UK to engage in regime change or interfere in a foreign government or foreign populations, democratic or not particularly democratic rights. This is about trying to correct and bring back into what you would describe as the international norms, the behaviour of foreign government that is currently not behaving that way.
So you're obviously very alive to the threat, and there's clearly a lot of work going on to identify and counter it. But do you see it having any effect?
So you get into the very darkest spaces around our intelligence collection and insight there. And it's difficult for me to talk about that. I think we will be having insights into that. And the policymakers in particular will be receiving a flow of intelligence about that. Some of that I may see, some of that I may not see. The paradox of this business that I'm in is that you can sit in a room full of people and never quite know what everybody knows, because the compartmentalization process is such that some people may have had access to some material and some people may not. So it gets quite hard to know the entire position. You could describe it as maybe an internal grey zone. But I would say that I think we have optimism that by continue the course of action or the path we're on and ensuring and encouraging our partners to do the same, that is the right thing to do. I am hopeful that will ultimately be fruitful. Whether it has yet been fruitful in a way that we need it to be is probably more open for debate. There is not much doubt that the Russian state continues to conduct attacks against the UK, including cyber attacks on a daily basis.
But are we safer in the wake of Salisbury, in the wake of all that we know or that people like you have understood and learnt? And with this legislation that you've talked about that's coming online, are people in the UK safer?
I cannot say with certainty, having discussed with you the sort of size and shape of that Novichok bottle and how easy it would be to smuggle another one of those into the UK, I cannot say for certain that we are safe. We live in a liberal democracy. In the same way that our counter-terrorism colleagues would say we can't prevent every attack, we can't prevent an incredibly well-resourced, determined and ruthless adversary from finding some kind of way of getting something like Novichok in. I suppose the questions we ask ourselves are around essentially intent and capability. Do we stand a better chance of knowing that something is coming? Probably, although I would say the pace of technological change means it's an absolute arms race for us to keep up with the way in which technology is evolving, encryption, etc. So how do we stay ahead of that to understand if something is coming? That's a key element. Can I say with certainty that we would have a better chance of spotting something after it happened in the way that we did with Salisbury? I feel very confident, and I am at times, frankly, humbled at the amazing abilities of our police colleagues, particularly to forensically unpick crimes such as the one that happened in Salisbury. It is a remarkable thing to actually be close to a major investigation like that. So, are we closer to being able to see those things and identify the attackers and the way in which something has been carried out against us? I would say yes. So then it comes down to intent. And I guess the question for us has to be, are we in a position to persuade the adversary, whoever it is, Russian state, the decision makers at the top of the Russian government, whether the personal, political, economic, reputational costs of carrying something out and getting caught are worth it? I think success for us as a government and a country looks like those people concluding that the cost of doing it and being caught and the international response which it would produce means that it's just not worth it. And I think that's when we as a country and a community are in a position to start moving those decision makers back into the space of saying, actually, we should behave in a more kind of responsible way as an international partner, and rewarding them for doing so.
And do you think maybe that the calculation for them is changing when they look at the UK because of the response they've seen?
Well, I would very much hope so. I think our ability to call out those actions, were they to take place, has increased. So they will have to be making a different set of calculations. But I can't claim that I really understand the set of moral or legal or operational, reputational calculations that the GRU senior leadership or the Russian state senior leadership are making. Because it feels to me, if you look at the Salisbury attack, that this was a wholly disproportionate and outrageous, invasion against the United Kingdom. And we can't have anything but kind of disgust for it. Are they still interested in people in the UK? The reason we have a very developed understanding of the people at risk and the mitigations that I've described in place is because we know that the Russian state continues to take an interest in people here who we deem to be at risk. And that's not a passive interest. It's quite an active interest. So we think that they are probably still trying to collect information about people. To what end? It's not immediately apparent, but we're not going to take any risks of finding out that the intelligence that they've been collecting has been towards some kind of physical attack. We will continue to push back and call that out where we see it.
I asked the Russian embassy in London whether it wanted to respond to the allegations about trying to rebuild its team of intelligence officers and about Russia taking an interest in certain individuals in the UK. I've yet to receive a response to those questions. And are there attacks that have happened that just haven't been made public?
In what sense?
Well, we know of the Salisbury attack, obviously, and we know about cyber attacks against laboratories and research facilities, and we know about the pre-election hack and leak job. But is there stuff bubbling around below the surface that doesn't peek through?
The threat is manifesting itself constantly, both inside the UK and outside. And we are constantly suppressing it where we can, wherever we find it. It is that truism about intelligence work that our successes are very often secret and our failures are very often public. So I would say that we have an amazing collaborative community of like-minded people who are determined to protect the UK. And they're doing a really good job at it, in my opinion.
But as we've heard throughout this series, the nature of warfare is changing. Spies and soldiers can't be the only line of defence. Not when it's people's minds, freedoms, way of life that's under attack.
We're neither in a state of peace nor are we in a state of war, but we're sitting in this very dangerous place between.
The line between truth and lie is a continuation of the line between peace and war, so that the stakes here are extremely high.
Information warfare goes on all the time. And I call it the 4D model, which is dismiss, distort, distract, and dismay.
Weaponization of information, of kind of taking things and then saying, well, how do I use this in the most disruptive or kind of coercive way?
The whole aim is to create disturbance, to discredit us in this instance, and simply to cause a problem, to cause turmoil, to cause upset.
Looking for a cyber Pearl Harbor, as people call it, one massive event to change the course of history, may actually be missing the point that there's already so many smaller events happening that really should be stopped.
Cyber is not online. Cyber is use of the online environment to change things in the real world.
We need to be able to compete with our adversaries. We need to be able to contest in cyberspace.
Until the spark, there isn't a spark.
That is potentially a very dangerous flashpoint. And it's a more dangerous flashpoint today than it was 2 or 3 years ago.
You've got a world with far more weaponry in it, and that means that a miscalculation could be really rather horrific if it occurs.
In the grey zone, the front line is everywhere. No one is too unimportant to be a target. That's why everyone has a part to play in understanding the threat. Ignore these warning signs, and life might just change without you realising. Until it's too late.
If you want to boil a frog, you don't drop it into boiling water, because it'll jump straight out again. You put it in cold water and you slowly bring the water up to boil. By the time the frog realises it's getting too hot, it's lost the energy to be able to jump out. We're being boiled like a frog. We can prevent that. If we don't, then the answer is enjoy the gathering storm, because bad news is coming.
Into the Grey Zone is a Sky News podcast. It was edited and produced by Chris Scott, with production support from Sophia McBride and Michael Greenfield, and narrated by me, Deborah Haynes. The head of Sky News Radio is Dave Terrace. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.